Okay, welcome to the Stellify podcast. And today my guest is Mark Gober. Mark is an author, researcher, and international speaker who's dedicated himself to challenging one of the deepest assumptions of modern science and culture, and that consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain. Mark's the author of An End to Upside Down Thinking, An End to Upside Down Living, in fact, many books, and the Upside Down, which I'm hoping to dive into with you. Mark has been laying out evidence suggesting consciousness is fundamental, the foundation of all reality. Mark has also explored what this means for some of our most important questions, from near-death experiences to our very cosmology and to political influence with the Great Reset looming. Mark is also the host of Where Is My Mind, a fantastic podcast that brings together scientists, experiences, and thinkers who are willing to question materialist dogma and consider the possibility that reality is far stranger and more interconnected than we are taught. Beyond the books and podcasts, what I really appreciate about Mark is how accessible he makes these big questions. Mark is very well educated and comes from a background in investment banking, bringing rigor and clear thinking to topics that are, too often dismissed or ridiculed. So on this podcast, we're going to explore what consciousness really is and what the evidence actually says, and why rethinking the nature of reality itself, including our cosmology, might be the key to reclaiming our sovereignty. So welcome to the show, Mark. I really appreciate you being here with me. I've been very excited to chat with you. I've been listening to a lot of your material over the past couple of months, and it's a brave place to be when you have the background you have as well. I mean, I'm all right. I've been labelled a nutter for about 12 years, so you stepping out there talking about paranormal activities, that must have been a tough place. What started that for you then?
Yeah, it was definitely an unexpected journey for me. Because like you said, I come from the world of investment banking. And at the time I was working in Silicon Valley, advising technology companies. This was back in 2016. And I came across podcasts initially where people were talking about the nature of consciousness and things that sounded paranormal. The word paranormal to me is problematic because it assumes that we know what normal means. So paranormal just means something outside of what mainstream science says is normal. But that's, in any event, what I was coming across. The evidence for psychic abilities, evidence that our consciousness continues when the body dies, even the idea that there could be intelligences that we don't see with our eyes that exist. And it led me to question the nature of reality itself and what it means to be a human being. Who are we? Why are we here? And that was pretty world-changing for me, life-changing, because I used to think that life was random and meaningless, and that any meaning we create in life is just some rationalization, not anything that's built into the fabric of reality itself. And then I was coming across evidence suggesting that actually maybe life has meaning and that we should align with that meaning and then prioritize life differently. So it's been a roughly 9-year journey now of questioning many paradigms, but this one that you mentioned is at the core of it, which is what is the nature of consciousness itself? Because we all have consciousness. Right now, we're all having a sense of experiencing life. The question is, what is that? Is it just a byproduct of our body? Is it because of chemical and electrical activity in our brain? Or is there some other reason that we're conscious, something more spiritual, let's say? And unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I was so grounded in this worldview that life is random and meaningless. I came across evidence that led me to say, wait, I think consciousness is pointing us into a more spiritual direction. That's just where the science leads us.
I can imagine it was mind-blowing. I mean, I remember when I had a sort of spiritual awakening back in 2012 and my worldview changed, and I'm like, all right, then where am I? What is this place? Then I don't really understand. We're getting all these synchronicities and various other things coming into my life, and that had never happened before. It was, and I started to question reality myself. I've not gone into as much detail, I don't think, as you have. I mean, I think it's incredible the work that you've been putting in, and very important because, especially coming from a guy so educated and from the background that you have, it's hoped that this reaches many more of the mainstream type of person, the day-to-day person that like yourself, you were looking at this world and thinking, this is it. This is me, 9 to 5 or whatever it is, and then you die, and then that's over. But it's not like that, is it? It's not.
No, I think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that's not true, that there is real meaning to life. And what you said there is part of the rationale for writing my book, at least the first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, which I wrote about a year into this journey of exploration. So I wrote it in 2017. It was published in 2018. But my thinking was that because of my background coming from the mainstream, I was hoping to be able to bridge to people who might be more closed-minded to these things normally. But because they'd say, oh, well, this guy worked in finance or whatever, I'll at least read the first few pages. And I wrote that book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, as a science book. There are hundreds of citations. And what I realized in my research was that there's a lot of science that many people who are, quote unquote, well-educated, they're not aware of it. I had never heard of any of this stuff. And I'm sure we'll get into it. But things like the US government has declassified documents talking about the psychic spying program. This is known as remote viewing, which is where people can send their mind far away in space and time. And the document says, I included in the book, remote viewing is a real phenomenon. Implications are revolutionary. That's just one example. Then there's a whole host of peer-reviewed literature on the evidence for psychic phenomena and other things, and many, many books. The University of Virginia has a division of perceptual studies at the medical school, which has been around since the late 1960s. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I'm on the board of, has been around since 1973, 50 plus years worth of peer-reviewed research on psychic phenomena and other things. So when I tell people about this stuff who, let's just say that they were like I used to be, they'd never heard of it before, it's almost too hard to believe. So you're reminding me of when I wrote this book, and End Upside Down Thinking, the manuscript, first draft, I sent it to a few of my friends when I was still working in the business world. And a bunch of them gave me really positive feedback. But one, and he's a really great guy, really smart guy in the finance world, he said, we need to talk about this, Mark. You cannot publish this book. People are going to think you're crazy. When we went through it, though, some of his arguments were, one thing he said is, the statistical evidence for these phenomena that you're describing, it's too good. The evidence is too strong. It can't be real. But I realized very quickly that it was cognitive dissonance. It was a psychological discomfort with all the evidence that he was reading. No, this can't be real, because there are so many smart professors out there who are not endorsing this perspective. And who are you to come in and say that they're all wrong? That's kind of the mentality that goes on. And hopefully what I've been trying to do is to push back on that.
That's an interesting correlation from what happened in 2020, is it not? Where all the scientists are coming out and saying such a thing, and most people are falling in line with that, because we are taught to trust the people in the white coats and authority and government and things like that. But the cognitive dissonance is strong because of that kind of programming that we endure through our education, I say we're born into trauma, we're thrown into indoctrination camps, we're taught how to behave. We're not really taught how to live and to experience and to feel and to love and this, that, and the other. And the worldview is purely then in a very narrow viewpoint, then, where exploration of these topics is scary for people. I find them fascinating. I always found myself in spiritual shops when I was a kid. I'll be the one picking up the astrology books or the witchcraft books or whatever, just because I'm fascinated by it and I was drawn to it. And I could never understand why. I mean, my parents probably thought I was a bit crazy then, but it's always been part of my interest, if you like. So this was nothing. You had no interest in this at all.
No, the only thing I could think of is that when I was very young, I remember asking questions about why are we here? And I am also remembering recently that I came across an astrologer or someone who was sort of psychic and being very intrigued by it a few years prior to this exploration, and not knowing why I was interested in it and not thinking in a spiritual way, but I was just intrigued. So maybe there was this part of me that always had the interest. But what happened is, and I think this happens to a lot of people in modern society, I got stuck on the hamster wheel of wanting to achieve the next thing in front of me. And there was so much stress and anxiety around, well, I need to get an A on this test. I need to win this tennis match. I was a competitive tennis player. And you can imagine how that would lead to, it's like being on a treadmill. There's constant sprinting, but not really getting anywhere. And because of that, my consciousness was oriented in a direction that was toward these achievements without being able to look at the bigger picture because I was so busy.
Yeah. So what was the big, was there something that triggered you at the point where you needed to explore this? Is there anything in particular that that sent you on this path?
I mean, in hindsight, I felt like I was at a bit of it was a dark night of the soul. I had just turned 30. And in astrological terminology, this was the Saturn return, which I didn't realize at the time either. So there was a lot happening in life. Some relationships didn't go the way I wanted. There were some business deals that I spent a lot of time on that didn't go the way I wanted. I thought life was meaningless. So I was in a place that was probably ripe for something new. And I started listening to podcasts that year, and this stuff just started coming in. Initially, it began with Tim Ferriss's podcast. He was talking about things like sensory deprivation, flotation tanks. And I was living in San Francisco. So I said, why don't I just try that? Why don't I go in? So you go into a tank. It's basically a pod that has salt water. And there's so much salt that your whole body floats in it. And you can close the top of the tank, turn the lights off, no sound. And it's meditation on steroids, basically.
Lovely.
So I don't know what that did, but that probably was doing something with my consciousness. And I was continuing to learn more and more. And I got hooked. I remember feeling like, wow, I've never experienced a passion for a material like this before. Like, I have to keep going in this direction.
That's really cool, though, isn't it? I can imagine there was some kind of, I don't know, connection with the salt in the water as well, maybe, that maybe heightened your, because we're essentially, I think you talk about it a lot yourself, don't you? The brain itself is a receiver, isn't it? Or our bodies is a receiver, really. That's become my feeling over the past few years, is that, because I get different thoughts sometimes, Mark. I'm thinking, well, that's not my thought. I don't, who's putting that thought even in my head? You know, I feel that sometimes these things are happening. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we really just sit down with our experience and analyze our thoughts or an idea, where does it come from? We actually don't really feel the source of it. Most of us will probably say, oh, well, it's because of things happening in the brain. And we know that because of neuroscience. But that's really just mental gymnastics based on things we've been told in society. But imagine if you knew nothing and you just sat there with your own consciousness. They're just thoughts are appearing and arising. And sometimes it feels like we can steer them, but sometimes an idea just comes in. And you're getting to what's known as the hard problem of consciousness, which I discuss in my books and my podcast series. Basically, we all have consciousness right now. We have the sense of experiencing life. But how could that just pop out of a brain, as neuroscience assumes it does? Because our brain and our body, these are physical entities that we can study, we can touch them, we can characterize them. Consciousness, we can't even really define it because we can't point to it, we can't touch it. It's something purely subjective. It's always in our experience. So, and I like to use this argument when I'm starting off with someone who's totally new to this, because there is something known as the hard problem of consciousness. How could something abstract and non-physical like consciousness pop out of something physical like a brain or a body? There's no known mechanism for how that could happen. No one has ever seen consciousness just pop out of a brain. All we have seen are correlations between brain activity and conscious experience. In other words, we can look at a part of the brain and let's say we stimulate it. We can see the person's consciousness changes in a certain way. We can damage a part of the brain responsible for vision, and the person has a corresponding change in eyesight. And there are these very tight correlations. Change the brain in this way, change consciousness in this way. So some people will say, okay, therefore the brain creates consciousness. The reason that's not an appropriate logical step is because it's not always the case that things that are correlated are causally related to each other. Correlation does not necessarily imply causation. In the same way, is if we showed up at the scene of a fire and we saw firefighters there, we could naively conclude, oh, look, the firefighters caused the fire because the firefighters are there. Obviously, they created the fire. No, that's a naive perspective. And to your point, Ant, it might be that the brain is related to our experience, but it's not producing it. So it's like the brain's an antenna or a filtering mechanism or an interface. In the same way as if you're watching television, and the reason you're able to watch the show is because there's a signal that's sent out and the antenna picks up the signal and you're watching a show on TV because the antenna is picking up the signal. And if we take a hammer and just smash the antenna, all of a sudden the television show will be very scratchy on the screen. but the signal that it was receiving, the signal was fine. So it's the
Absolutely.
same way potentially with the brain. If you mess with the brain or change it, it might change the receiver or the interface or the filtering mechanism for consciousness, but consciousness is not dependent on the brain.
Yeah, well, that would suggest as well. I know you've talked about mediums as well in the past, where it's like they can pick up a different frequency in that respect, or even people who have seen UFOs. I had a conversation with a gentleman who's seen UFOs, and he feels it's because he's on a specific frequency that he's able to view these. And I think our bodies are incredible, that I think the heart and the nervous system, as well as the brain, plays a big part. You've got your intuition and everything else that falls in line. That allows our consciousness to experience this human experience effectively. And you've obviously dove deep into this. Have you found anything to fall in line with other parts of the body? I mean, the brain itself, Mark, I find it tricks me. My mind, my brain will trick me. And I find that if I get out of the way of myself, I will experience, my life is a better experience. Is that something you've gone down the road with?
Yeah, well, two things I'd say. First is, if we get the brain out of the way for a second, there's research that's been done on people who receive organs from someone else. They get a transplant, and often they will take on new personality traits, sometimes even have memories, different food preferences, and they will be basically taking on the characteristics of the person that they got the organ from. So it's like their consciousness was somehow transferred. Wow. There's one case I reference in my books of a young girl who, after having a heart transplant, she began having horrible nightmares about being murdered, very vivid nightmares. So she was taken to the psychiatrist by her mother. And the psychiatrist said, wait a second, I want you to tell me about these dreams and describe the murderer for me. And they realized actually the heart that the girl received was from someone who had been murdered. Wow. And she had memories of this murder. And allegedly they were able to find the murderer of the person that she received the heart from based on her descriptions. So that's, one very extreme case, but there are many other cases where it might be more subtle. I met someone recently who told me he had a liver transplant, and I pulled him aside and I said, have you noticed anything has changed since you got the liver transplant? He was like, how'd you know? Like, people around me, they know I'm a little bit different. There's certain foods I don't like anymore. He's like, I don't feel quite like I'm the same person. And so to your point, it's not all the brain. There's some kind of transference of consciousness that's not just in the brain organ. But I want to also go on to the point about like the brain not being, when we get the brain out of the way, it can actually enhance our consciousness. And there are a number of examples where this occurs. And I like to call it less brain, more consciousness, which is paradoxical, because if the brain exclusively created consciousness, you'd expect people to have an enriched consciousness at a time when the brain is highly functional. Yeah. So a near-death experience is a good example where it's the opposite. A person has little or no brain functioning. Sometimes the person is clinically dead, and yet they have an experience in their consciousness that they say is realer than real life. They can see with 360-degree vision. Sometimes they hover over their body and they see or hear what's happening from that vantage point, and they come back in their body and they tell the doctor or family members what they saw and heard at a time when the brain should not have been capable of producing anything. So it's this expanded consciousness when the brain is out of the way. I mean, another example, savant syndrome. These are people who have extraordinary mental abilities like mathematical abilities or music, and yet they have a brain that's damaged in a certain way. So how could it be that they have this enriched consciousness when their brain seems to be damaged in some ways? Yeah. So there are these patterns sometimes of less brain, more consciousness, where some have called the brain a filter of consciousness, meaning that it's sort of like a receiver, but it's not just purely receiving it. It's like a blindfold. That's the term we use in the podcast, Where is My Mind? That the brain is blocking a bigger consciousness. And when you take the blindfold off, all of a sudden this broader reality is exposed. Another analogy that I use sometimes is like a Play-Doh toy. When you put Play-Doh through it, it can make almost like spaghetti pieces of Play-Doh. Do you know what I mean? If you like squeeze it, it's almost like our consciousness is the Play-Doh, and it's filtered through the mechanism of the brain, and it comes out a little bit differently. It's experienced differently. based on the way our brain is filtering it. Whereas pure consciousness, or the pure Plato, is its own thing. It's totally unobstructed, but the brain is obstructing that and showing us a sliver of reality.
So in essence, really, the human experience is restricted heavily in the I know we've got more than 5 senses, because I think, we just don't follow the route. But in general, we say, you see, you feel, you touch, you smell, whatever. There's a very narrow bandwidth. I think it's David Icke talks about. There's a very narrow bandwidth of what we can see, isn't there, through our own human eyes. There's a lot more going on. There's stuff going on around us as we speak right now in this very room, and the room that you're in. There'll be activity going on that we cannot feel or see or touch.
Yeah, that's right. Even by mainstream scientific standards, our perceptual organs, our eyes, ears, and so forth, are only picking up a sliver of reality. We can measure other things that our organs are not picking up. Even the things that we hear, they're frequencies that our body is not attuned to hearing. So it is as if their body is actually limiting our perception. There are people who have been blind since birth, and then they go into a near-death experience state and they're able to see suddenly. So they're not even using their eyes. And I'll give another example that was very fascinating for me. I was at a festival called Confluence in Bandera, Texas, hosted by Alex Zeck and The Way Forward, Molly Engelhart. One of the speakers is my friend, Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan, who's Harvard-trained, very smart, used to be a mainstream woman, and then she became a Chinese medicine doctor and has had many mystical experiences with her children, including now teaching them how to perceive with a blindfold on. And now she teaches many children how to do this. So there was one of the talks, basically, was Dr. Edith at Confluence with children on stage who were able to see things with a blindfold on. They were able to perceive things that people in the audience drew, so no one even knew what was going to be drawn, and the children could describe it. There were children playing chess with the blindfold on, children solving Rubik's Cubes with the blindfold on. So a part of the reason I'm bringing this up is that I think we do have innate abilities to perceive beyond our normal senses, but because we haven't really harnessed them, as we age out of childhood and we become more disconnected, they sort of fade away. Yeah. But if those abilities can be harnessed in, let's say, a more advanced society that hopefully we're going to move toward, there might be way more abilities than our normal organs are showing us.
It reminds me of that clip in The Matrix with the spoon. There is no spoon.
Yeah.
It's our brain getting in the way, really. There is no spoon. I mean, that would open up a question of, they talk about that we are creators, and I believe us, creators of our own reality.
Yeah.
If we are in a dream as such, it's like, how do we dream a better dream? Surely we can have better experience. A lot of people are suffering in this world. If they're able to, I think you talk a lot about the quantum physics, the quantum mechanics of this realm that we're in. So that would suggest that things are a bit more malleable, aren't they? That we can actually make a difference in our own experiences.
Yeah, there's some very strange phenomena that we have observed in physics for 100+ years. And these are phenomena that seems to be, they are observed over and over again. One is known as entanglement, the idea that things that are far away have an interconnectedness where you affect one and the other one is affected in a correlated way at the same instant, which doesn't make sense because they're far away. So there's something interconnected that exists. And there's also something known as the observer effect, where when people observe an experiment, I'm simplifying this drastically, the behavior of the experiment changes. And the question in science is whether or not observing means shining a light on something and there's like a physical mechanism for changing the experiment, or is it the person's consciousness that's affecting the experiment, meaning that there's something in the mind that can affect the world around us. That's the implication. And Dr. Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Sciences has done a number of studies. And of course, we need more replications independently. But where he's looked at this study in physics and asked people to try to influence it basically with their mind, to try to isolate the variable of, well, let's just see if it's the mind that's affecting it. And he's finding a statistical effect that people are steering the experiment based on the mind alone. And this is getting to big questions that you raise about the nature of reality itself. Because if there is an interconnectedness and if the mind can affect reality in some way, then what does that mean about our day-to-day life and
Mm.
our effect on other people, other organisms, the effect of our thoughts on our own life too. And I talk about this a bit in my book, An End to Upside Down Medicine. If our body, let's say, is not even purely physical, if there's some spiritual reality and our body is a vessel for that consciousness, and if the mind can affect the physical world, that means we have to look at the body in a new way. And that means we have to think about health in a new way and incorporate the mind and consciousness into health much more than mainstream medicine does.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I would, you could feel it if someone's even got anger towards you. I find, Mark, if you're sensitive enough, if somebody's got a real dislike to you, you can feel it. I mean, I used to run a pub, and if an individual walked into that pub with bad intention, the room would change. You would feel it. That's the power of what we have as an individual of sensing something. The brain couldn't logically figure that out, really, unless he came in with a sword in his hand or something, and he was going to do something bad. But generally, an individual could walk in that room, order a drink, but you would feel a negative energy from that person, and I know myself when I've upset somebody in the past, and you can feel that as well if you're open to it. It suggests that we are a bit more special than we're taught. I think there's something much more important going on, and I want to get into this a bit later on regarding a bit about the pandemic time and the Great Reset and things like that, on why they may do these kind of things. But I do feel that we're very special, and there is good reason. What in terms of science, though? I mean, I presume with your books you've had some skepticism coming forward from scientists, and I know that again. I've listened to a lot of your work, and scientists don't want to be wrong, do they?
They don't. There's definitely a lot of ego and hubris. Not every scientist, but it actually makes a lot of sense to me. If you've spent your whole career, get a PhD or some advanced degree, and then you're a professor, to think that the foundations of your belief system are wrong, that's very challenging. Number one, it's upsetting to think, okay, well, how did I miss this? But then also in a public manner, it's frustrating, I'm sure, to say, wait, I've been promoting something and I have to admit to all these people that I was wrong. There's an incentive for people to want to hold on to their belief systems, which ironically, this is an anti-scientific perspective, because in science, it's all about questioning beliefs and asking questions and trying to falsify. So there is this major resistance I found. With regard to my work in particular, I've largely been left alone. I feel like I've been ignored more than anything. Or if I have encountered criticisms, many people will criticize based on something that they heard, or they'll take a clip of something and they haven't actually read the books and looked at all the citations.
Yeah.
So that's what I find. But with regard to this, the resistance, some of the resistance to the materialist view of consciousness, that consciousness comes out of the brain, there's a bigger picture there. Materialism is all about the idea that all of reality is just made of matter, and that everything in reality emerges out of matter. And when you configure that matter, atoms and so forth, into a human body with a brain, the consciousness magically pops out. And that all happened because of a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago that filled the universe with these bits of matter that started interacting with each other. So we're talking about a very big metaphysical picture here. And to challenge that, you're basically challenging the container for how to think about reality. It's very disturbing to do so, because it also opens up the possibilities like the one you described, where someone's energy field, the way they're feeling, could affect another person. That's challenging to a materialist, or some would call it a physicalist perspective, because under that perspective, it's like you have these little billiard balls at the smallest level of reality, atoms, quarks, subquarks. One hits the next, hits the next, hits the next, and that's what causes things to happen in the world. But if we have to depart from materialism and say, wait, maybe it's not all physical, number one, it opens up many possibilities, but it's disturbing, because it's like, wait a second, now I have to think about all new things in every area of science, basically.
Yeah, it will do. And it's your worldview. You protect your worldview, don't you? You've brought with it, like you say, if you've educated heavily in that, especially if you have got a good job in it and you're earning the decent money and you're looking after your family, and all of a sudden your worldview changes, you are risking your job effectively. And that does happen.
Well, that's a great point. I've encountered this a lot because I've met many of the scientists and interviewed them who are very brave, in my opinion. They're ones who are willing to question this materialist or physicalist view of reality and study things like telepathy and energy healing and near-death experiences. But what I hear repeatedly, because they all started in academia, many of them have advanced degrees, but what they're told repeatedly is, you can't talk about this in academia. If you want to get tenure as a professor, don't do this. You basically get laughed out of academia because there's such institutional pressure against this. And fortunately, there are some brave scientists who they'll work, for example, at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia or the Institute of Noetic Sciences, like I mentioned. But what I also hear from many of the scientists is that they will hear from some mainstream professors and academics who will privately tell them, I'm really interested in your work, but I can't talk about this publicly. It would be too damaging to my reputation.
It's such a shame, isn't it? Because it's like we're being hidden from something in that. You know, my thoughts that come into my mind is, why is it such a big deal to hide this potential of human experience and allow this adventure for people? Because I think this is a true adventure. What is it that's stopping this adventure moving forward? Because is it about money and control and power? Because I can't see anything else.
I think those are all elements, and there might be another level even to it, which I like to call in my books spiritual war, that there's some desire on a spiritual level to keep the human soul suppressed and in a state of ignorance. And when I started this journey of research 9 years ago, I didn't start there. My thinking was, well, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of desire for power and control, but because I didn't have a spiritual understanding at the time, or I didn't have an understanding the extent of good and evil, which is something I've gotten into in my later books, that we know that exists in the human world, where there's some people that are obviously wanting to help others that are malicious and want to murder and torture and so forth. There's a big spectrum of humans, but that seems to exist in non-human intelligence as well. That's my book, An End to Upside Down Contact. It's about contact with non-human intelligences. But what I learned in this process of research is that not only in the modern era, but throughout history and cultures all over the world, there are experiences and encounters with dark entities. And there seems to be a desire from that side, whatever that force is, to keep humanity suppressed, to keep us in a state of not being empowered. So it could be that what we're seeing in academia is some manifestation of it. I don't know how it works, but there's something that is trying to keep us down. And I was a victim of it, like so many people I know, because I was never taught about these other possibilities. I wasn't taught about this other area of science. I was just taught, well, that's science fiction. And there was an interview I listened to a few years ago. I quote this in a few of my books on the podcast Skeptico. Dr. Mario Beauregard, who's a neuroscientist who's been very brave to study spiritual phenomena. He says in that interview that he was told by the head of a neurological institute in Canada, a top neurological institute. This person said to him, as long as I'm here and alive, you will never study spiritual phenomena scientifically. So there was complete and explicit suppression. So what he said, Dr. Beauregard, he said, this is clearly social engineering. It's dark versus light.
Very interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually. It's one of the reasons I actually started this channel, Mark. You know, it's only a year old, but it was after experiencing the corruption from I didn't experience 9/11, but waking up to 9/11, waking up to various other things, and then 2020 being such a big event, I was like, well, okay, so they already have the money, they already have the power. What is it that makes them want to keep us all in a low vibration, want to keep us in fear all the time? It has to be something more. And my exploration has took me down that path as well, really. That this realm has a consciousness that is dark. There is the light and the dark, and there's something more going on. And it makes me, I'm interested. Are these guys who are the gatekeepers at the top, the puppets at the top end, if you like, are they gaining something from this consciousness, or are they unconscious and are just being used? I question all of these things. What is it all about? What are they gaining from it? Because there's something going on.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is that there are people who are maybe three categories. People who are completely unconsciously tapping into this dark force, maybe because they had trauma or they've chosen to make decisions that are immoral repeatedly, but they don't realize that they're tapping into something actually dark metaphysically. Then there might be other people who are being controlled by a third party through blackmail, bribery, threats, mind control, like the US government's MKUltra program. So there's sophisticated mind control to torture people or alter people's consciousness such that they can be controlled. And even you can develop new personalities. You can dissociate someone's personality, create a new personality that is distinct from the normal one, and then activate it. And that personality can have new skills. It could be a killer, a trained killer, or whatever they want to control, to program that person to be, or that personality within the person. So there's this category of people that are being controlled: blackmail, bribery, threats, mind control. And then there's the third category, which was the hardest one for me to really grapple with, which is people who are knowingly doing this. They know that there are dark forces and they want to tap into them because maybe they believe it gives them power. And something I've written about in my books, only sparingly because the details are really gory and gruesome, and I've actually had to give warnings in my book, An End to Upside Down Contact, because if someone's traumatized, it can be traumatizing to hear this stuff. But basically, it's the category of what's known as satanic ritual abuse, of sophisticated rituals that are ancient, apparently, because they've been described for a very long time. Sophisticated methods of torture that invoke dark entities, demonic beings, because those beings apparently feed off of the suffering of living organisms. And there are people who have survived some of this who have described dark entities showing up at the rituals. And the idea here, apparently, is that people who engage in these rituals are gaining some power by basically selling their soul and doing this horrific stuff. So the reason I mention this is not to dwell on the evil stuff. It's important to know it exists, but to me, it's a window into the psychology of evil and how it works in the spiritual war. Because if there are beings that actually feed off of the worst kind of torture you could ever imagine, things most people could never imagine, and if that exists in our reality, it might explain a lot of what happens in our world.
Yeah, no, I think awareness is really important. And it's about shining the light into the darkness to bring out the shadow so you can see it for what it is. And without seeing it, how do we navigate it, or how do we deal with it? And that's why it's important work that you're doing, Mark, to bring this kind of knowledge to the table. It's important. Sorry, you were going to say something then.
No, I have the same perspective with this stuff, because learning about dark things or the evil that exists in the world, it's not a pleasant activity. And if your audience is interested in that sort of thing, I would just suggest gauging your own tolerance for it, because we all have different levels of tolerance. For me, I had to learn about some of these case studies of people who have survived, for example, these horrific tortures. And then at a certain point, it becomes too painful to read about the ways in which they were tortured over and over again. And I'd have to take a break and then come back. But what made me come back is exactly what you said. We need to understand reality. And if reality includes this very dark level of evil, we should know it exists. Because what I find is that, especially even in spiritual communities, people who are aware that there are other realities and other dimensions, they might not be aware of the dark side of it quite as much. They're aware of the unconditional love and the angelic forces that people describe, but they haven't come across how evil some of this stuff is, or how deceptive the wolf in sheep's clothing can be. So I actually think it's a part of being a responsible human to know the spectrum of what exists so that we can navigate the world better and not succumb to the wolf in sheep's clothing, because the deception part is really key. You could have people, let's say, who are engaging in these horrific rituals, but often the story over and over again is that they live normal lives and you'd never know who they are. So that's pretty interesting, isn't it? So that means we have to be very discerning about the world around us for the sake of ourselves, our families, our souls. It's something I think a lot about. I don't have an answer to this, but I wonder about the consequences for the soul of making a really bad mistake. Yeah. I mean, some people would say there are no mistakes, but I learned in my book, An End to Upside Down Living, where I talked about the spiritual awakening journey, is that when one becomes higher and higher on the, let's just say they become closer to a level of enlightenment, they become more and more aware of how reality works. and they're able to do very good things in the world. Apparently, the stakes are higher as you elevate in your consciousness, meaning that if you make a mistake, you should have known better. And therefore, the consequences for your soul are more severe. The story that I often tell comes from Dr. David Hawkins, who was a very advanced spiritual teacher. I never met him myself, but I listened to hundreds of hours of his lectures and books. Yeah. And he was a classically trained psychiatrist in New York. So seeing patients as a doctor, but then he had his own spiritual awakening, spent years meditating, and then integrated those two things of traditional psychiatry and spiritual psychiatry, basically. Yeah. And he talked about on his way to higher and higher levels of consciousness. At one point, he reached a state where he felt like it was just him. He was all alone and in this very elevated state of consciousness that it was difficult to describe. And he said all of a sudden there arrived what he called a knowingness, meaning some kind of knowing or being or intelligence that said to him, all power is yours because you have transcended all of your personal karma. Take this power. You could have power over everything. And he said he had an instant basically to accept this or not. And his thought process in the instant was, I am everything. Why would I need to take power over others? I reject this. Mm-hmm. He calls it the Luciferic temptation.
Interesting.
He said that every soul will encounter something like this. It might not be exactly what he encountered. And typically those on the spiritual journey, they encounter challenges in three areas: money, sex, and power. Mm-hmm. Money, sex, and power. That's something Mariana Kaplan has chronicled. So what David Hawkins said is that he wanted to tell his students about this, because at some point this moment would come for their soul. What he was shown at the moment that he rejected this Luciferic temptation, he was shown the beings that were basically given a similar temptation in their own soul journeys, and the ones that accepted the temptation. They basically had to start at the beginning of their soul journey because it was such a severe mishap, such a severe mistake to be that elevated and to take the temptation. Whereas he was shown the other beings that rejected it, and they reached these very elevated states. So it is super important, in my opinion, to understand this discernment of what evil looks like. It could be murder and things that we would think of as evil more blatantly, or it could be this trickster where it manifests as, oh, you've transcended all of your personal karma. Just take this power. To be very aware of it. And David Hawkins said he felt like it was part of his mission to teach people about this, so that when the moment came for their soul, they would have the awareness to know, wait a second, maybe this is one of those temptations.
And it's all about awareness, isn't it? I mean, this realm, whichever you look at it, I mean, they say it's the devil's playground in a way, I suppose, and the Gnostics say that, you know, the demiurge overrides this realm, if you like. He's the controller with his army of Archons that are influencing us, or distracting us, or the, you know, like you say, tricking us and effectively taking our energy and harvesting our energy to keep this place going as well, which I find a fascinating subject. Have you ever gone down that route? Have you ever looked into the Gnostic route?
Yeah, no, I have. And I've read a number of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which allude to this idea. There's a quote that I'll paraphrase here in one of the scriptures. It talks about how the rulers threw humanity into a state of confusion and toil so that they would be distracted by the things of the world and not have time to focus on the Holy Spirit. Meaning that, which is like how our society is structured. We're so distracted and we're not focused on the spiritual realms. And it does talk a lot about this notion of dark versus light, and the idea that the realm that we exist in was sort of a creation of a being that came from Sophia, I believe was the name. Yeah, it was a rogue being that created this world that kept the humans into a state of being suppressed so that they would forget their divine connection, even though that we all have it. It was maybe a form of jealousy that they wanted to keep the humans here so that we could be harvested because they didn't have the direct connection themselves. And I'm just paraphrasing many of the interpretations here. So I think that does resonate to me on some level, that there's some force here that is suppressing us. And I feel more and more strongly about this the more I research, because when I first started writing about consciousness, I was blown away. Okay, they've suppressed this idea of a spirit or a soul. Okay. But then I got into medicine and cosmology and politics and UFOs, and I'm realizing, wait a second, it's every area where it's inverted. that there's something going on here. And then I read these ancient texts. There is some spiritual war, in my opinion, that's going on. And if we look at what happens in many of these rituals where there is a legitimate feeding off of the energy that occurs, these dark beings, if we apply that to a broader scale, it very well could be that we exist in some world of dark and light, and we are being, there are forces that are involved. I'm thinking of the work now of Joel Schaefer, who's a shaman in the Toltec tradition.
I've had Joel on.
Joel. Okay. Yeah, Joel's great. I was actually just with him in Montana.
Oh, way, great.
One of his retreats. And he talks about the Toltec perspective, which is that there's a parasitic entity in this world that is literally feeding off of us constantly. And it's our goal is to get out of that and basically flow around it and be unpredictable so the being can't feed off of us. And many of our thoughts are not even our own thoughts. They're coming from this parasitic force. And the fear that we feel is actually not even our own fear. It's the fear that the being is feeling. We're feeling it on its behalf or something like that. It's feeling it through us.
Yeah.
So there are these threads in many different cultures of dark forces that are involved. And being aware of that is super important, because there is this tendency, you can go from, like, I'll tell you my journey. I went from nihilistic, atheist, agnostic to nothing matters at all, to then, okay, spiritual reality exists. And we see the near-death experiences, or people take DMT, or they do meditation and they experience the unconditional love. I don't want to think about anything dark. To wait a second, that's a trap too. Mm-hmm. You can be very spiritually aware and then not aware of this other stuff. And the work of Ken Wilber rings true to me in this regard. He talks about lines of development, meaning that we can develop in distinct ways, be really elevated on one metric, but not on another one, because they're relatively independent. And he talks about waking up, cleaning up, growing up, and showing up. That those are all things that we should be trying to harness, because you could be very awakened. And let's say you had a near-death experience and you experienced the oneness, but maybe you haven't done the cleaning up and the growing up, the internal work. Or you do the waking up, the cleaning up, and the growing up, and you say, okay, I understand reality, but I'm just going to sit on my couch. I don't really need to show up to do anything about it. So it's these various lines of development that are critical.
What do you think our purpose is then, in terms of once you start waking up? I feel almost that I've got a responsibility now. And if that's me doing a podcast, and that's part of it, but also I've got responsibility for myself and my own, keeping my awareness and, like you say, discernment, not trying not to be tricked, which is a difficult thing to do in this realm, and sticking with my moral compass, trusting my intuition more, and doing the right thing. I feel like I'm on some kind of mission to help people find themselves, to help them remember who they truly are, that we are not the brain, we're not the body. This is part of our experience, and we need it to experience the human and earth, whatever this place is. But that's not who we truly are, and that's part of my mission. And with, obviously, you must be on a mission. I mean, you've written so many books. And by the way, I love your title, Upside Down, because this place is so inverted, it's untrue.
Yeah, well, I give credit to my publisher, the late Bill Gladstone, who sadly passed away recently, but he came up with the title of my first book. I wrote the manuscript and he said, this is going to be the title, An End to Upside Down Thinking, because he had much more experience in the publishing world and in the world in general, and he understood how much was inverted. So I was able to apply that title to all the other books. Another thing that he foresaw in me, I wrote my first book. I was still working in my job, just become a partner when the book was published, spent a whole career to get to that point. And I thought I would just stay in a normal career, and pursue these other interests on the side. And what happened was I got so pulled by these other interests that it felt like I had to pursue it like a mission, as you said. And my motivations, I feel, have fluctuated in a sense. There's a part of me that always loves sharing this information. That's why I like to do podcasts and talks and write these books, because it's important, in my opinion, for the information to be out there for those who are curious, to have that platform available. But then at other times, I move back toward the internal work of like, yeah, it's great to help everyone else, but I've got to get really clear with myself, and then I can help people even more. So it's this balance of working on the self, the individual, and the collective. They both work together, and it's flowing with those two.
Do you have any particular practices that you do at the moment? I know you've been with Joel, so I'm sure he's taught you quite a lot. He's such a great guy, Joel. So yeah. Is there anything else? Is there anything you do yourself daily?
That's also fluctuated for me over the years. various forms of meditation or breathing exercises, or some of Joel's work, which is the magical passes. They're sort of a combination of Qigong and martial arts. That's the way I describe it. Movements of the body that get you into flow. I don't understand how it works, but it does somehow. Or his work also with recapitulation, which is going through memories and reliving the memory, but breathing in the energy that you left there from that scene, and then breathing out what you took in that's no longer yours. And what he describes, I found this to happen as well, is that you'll go to one memory, and then when you recapitulate it, all of a sudden new memories that you've forgotten about, they come up. So you're able to then, it's a way of processing the past. And then just a lot of work with various healers. I found things like astrology, human design, gene keys, things about our blueprint based on when and where we're born. There's some personality tendencies that we have. So it's, to me, that the practice is really getting to know myself. And that can come about through these various means. That's what I'm finding. It's like getting to understand what's the core of who I am. And it's interesting to watch myself go through the process, because I started off with more of an intellectual understanding that seems to be the goal, based on many spiritual teachers that I looked at, is like, we're here to be vessels of consciousness. The way I describe it in my book, Into Upside Down Living, is it's like we're puzzle pieces. There's some cosmic puzzle, and we're each a unique piece. We're uniquely shaped. And our goal is to be the authentic version of that shape, and not to be anything else, like to be the purest version of that. So that the trick then is to shed all of the layers that keep us from being that puzzle piece.
Absolutely.
Some say that enlightenment is a path of subtraction. Subtracting all this stuff. And David Hawkins, he would say this comedically, but seriously. He said, the way to become enlightened is just to stop being unenlightened.
I get it. And the recapitulation is such a good thing to get into. I mean, I've done a bit. I've not done anything like, obviously, on Joel's standards or Howdy Mikowski. You know, he talks about it a lot. I've had Howdy on, and he talks about the life review. And I know you've touched on this because you've gone down the NDE route. I've had PMH Atwater on recently as well, and she's incredible. You know, the research that she's done, and obviously her own near-death experiences are fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But Howdy, and I know that a lot of people who are in the soul trap kind of community would look at the near-death life review as a potential trap. Have you ever explored that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've looked at many of these arguments on both sides. So let me, for your audience's benefit, if they're not familiar, explain what we're talking about here. So in near-death experiences, in roughly 20 to 30% of the cases, typically in the West, people describe having a life review. So this is at a time when their body is clinically dead or close to it. They are not only hovering over their body and perceiving things or having otherworldly experiences, but they also relive every event of their life, and they become the people that they affected. They feel the feelings that they imparted on that person, positive and negative. So for my podcast series, I interviewed Dannion Brinkley, who's had 4 near-death experiences. Each time he had a life review. And he told me each life review, which for him started at the beginning of his life, so he had to relive some things 4 times. He relived his combat days in Vietnam, where he killed people, and he felt what it was like to be the person that he killed through that person's eyes. He became that person. And he also felt, he said it was less strongly, but he felt the effects on the children who would no longer have a father because he killed the father in combat. So this was clearly traumatic. He said, Mark, I was vicious. I could tell how emotional he was getting, even though he's clearly experienced this and had to process it for a while. So that's a life review, for example. An empathic life review. You become the people that you affected. Later in his life, by the way, Dannion Brinkley, because he was so deeply affected by this experience, he became a hospice volunteer, because he said, okay, this life review thing is real. I want to do the best things I can for people. I want to help them so that I can feel that goodness in the life review. And sure enough, that's what happened. Not knowing he was going to almost die several times, he became a hospice volunteer. He helped people through the dying process. And in his later life reviews, he got to feel what it was like to be the dying person, being comforted by himself. And he felt the very positive things there. So the question then is, so people have this life review. It's been reported throughout history. There are many more reports now because resuscitation technology is so much better. But in any event, this is a phenomenon that's been described. The question is this a review that's helping our soul evolve in some way? Or, as people from the soul trap community would contend, is this experience part of a trap so that you believe you need to come back and reincarnate to correct your mistakes? And then there are beings in the afterlife that will basically trick you into having your soul come back. And then when your soul comes back, you end up suffering. And then the dark beings feed off of your suffering. That's basically the soul trap argument. Or what I would say is, I don't think this is not something that we can verify. These are all hypotheticals. One question I have is that I wonder if it's not uniform. That because there's this presumption often that, okay, what happens after death is basically the same thing for every soul. But could it be that every soul is facing something different? So maybe there's some souls that have to face more of deception and try to have to discern, and that's part of their soul learning, and others that don't. I've heard some people say that we had a soul trap here at one point, but the reincarnation cycle has been fixed. So over time, could it change? I don't know. When I talk to many people who've had like near-death experiences, for example, they're so positively impacted that it doesn't seem like it's possible from their perspective. Like Anita Morjani, she was dying of cancer. She had tumors all over her body. She had a near-death experience while she was in a coma, and she had many realizations. She reconciled things with her deceased father. She realized she had been too hard on herself, came back into her body. Her tumors disappeared. And she's out all over the world talking about her experience because it was a shift in her consciousness, she had some kind of a conflict resolution or some energetic shift. Cancer disappeared. So what I hear the flip side of that from a soul trap believer, they would say that she was targeted by the dark forces and she is now a propaganda agent. I have a hard time with that personally because I think she's promoting a lot of good things around the need for love and so forth. So I don't know what to make of it. I mean, the dark side of the soul trap theory, if we take it strictly as it's described, is that it then basically makes people not believe in love to some degree, because they'll say that when you experience love in the near-death experience, it's a love bomb. It's just feelings that are making you so overwhelmed with positivity that you can then be distracted from the deception. My concern is that it could then make people distrust love in general.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, the experiences that the accounts we get from many spiritually transformative experiences is that the nature of reality is unconditional love, that we're all part of a unified field of consciousness. And if we're getting into theories that make us question love, then is that a deception in some way? So I just lay this out there because I don't know the answer in any direction. I think we have to be discerning no matter what. So that I've thought about this. What happens when my soul transitions out of the body? I'm going to be very discerning because I don't know what to believe with any beings. And I heard someone say this, I can't remember who, that if we're approached by a being, we should ask the being to reveal its true identity.
Okay.
Which seems like a good strategy. I think we should always be discerning, but I also think we shouldn't just latch on to something that is unverifiable. I mean, I understand how the story could be told, but we actually can't verify it.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about stuff that we can't fully know. It's just not possible to fully know. And one of the pitfalls of this this soul trap discussion is it's quite depressing. You know that you know what is the point almost. You know, I hate it here so much that I don't see the point. I don't want to be here. You know, these are the kind of comments I often read. And my feeling on the matter is I'm having an experience here. And I want to enjoy my experience as best and as full as I possibly can in the most loving and beautiful way I can do it. And whatever happens afterwards, I'll have to deal with it then, because right now all I can deal with is right now. I have nothing else but the present moment. So I don't want to fall down that trap. And also, it concerns me that makes me completely powerless. You know, that if I'm a creator of a reality, then surely I have got, and if I'm a divine spark, you know, in the Gnostic sense, if I'm part of the divine, which I believe, you know, the majority is, then surely I can make a decision. surely I'm not powerless. Surely if I don't want to come back here, then I won't come back here. Surely that's on my side. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's all hypothetical. It's just a conversation. But
yeah, but I do think the theme of what you're describing here, it's one of personal authority and autonomy, that we get to make decisions, even in the soul realm. If we encounter beings and we're offered something, we have to just retain that. We don't want to offload our authority no matter what. And even in the soul trap perspective, there is that decision point, they would say, that you have a decision. You can go to this light or that light, or you can listen to the beings or not. But something I've been thinking about with the soul trap theory, because part of the theory is if you avoid the trap after your soul comes out of the body and you realize, okay, I'm not going to go into this false light and get my soul recycled. I'm not going to listen to these beings. I'm going to go another direction. I'm going to go into this this home-like place, or this broader area that's outside the trap. The impression I get from soul trap believers is that this is a very benevolent place outside the trap. So that would, to me, indicate that the trap coexists within something that's benevolent. And if that's true, to me, the next logical step is that even if it is a soul trap, it's because it's within something benevolent, it must ultimately be evolutionary in some way. There must be some benefit to the soul within the trap that it's learning, even in a perverse way. So to me, it kind of takes us back to the same place of the soul evolving, because even with a strict soul trap perspective, the soul has to evolve a level of discernment not to be tricked in the afterlife. So that is a form of evolution.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you mentioned before about, it's like not just taking on authority, you being the one who makes the decision. And in that respect, this place is very much a training ground. 2020 proves that. Are you just going to fall in line with what the media and the politicians are telling you, or are you going to make your own decision and enjoy life your way? You're not here to do any harm to anybody. It's this is a challenging place, but I would imagine my gut feeling, and I can't possibly know for sure, is that yes, I think we could get tricked. I don't think I'm trapped. I think I can easily be tricked, like I can be tricked here, and I think that would continue. We've just got to have a bit of wits about us, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's possible. And I'm remembering my early research into things like between lives, where people will, under hypnosis, not only go back to a past life, but they'll go back to a period between lives when they chose their current life. And the beings that they encountered that would encourage their soul to enter a body. There's a variation of cases I've heard where sometimes the soul really wanted to come back, but other times it feels a bit more coercive. It's like, well, you learned this lesson. I mean, there's a lot of data on this, but I'm just trying to give a perspective. So it's like, well, in those cases, were you really, did they want what's best for you? Because you might go into a life that's really challenging and they're just telling you to go back. But then I've heard, I'll give one example, Serena Faith Masterson. She wrote a book called I Am Serena. She was born into, her father was the head of a satanic cult. And from birth, she was being tortured. And she was sold into the US government's mind control program. So basically, this is about as bad as it can get. She developed over 300 distinct personalities because she was tortured so much. And over many years of healing, she had a mystical experience. I consider it mystical. She encountered a woman who brought her into her home and spent years with her healing these personalities in order to integrate them. Wow. Serena's perspective after all this, the worst torture you can imagine, her soul chose it because she would be able to heal so many people through her own healing. Because she was able to overcome some of the worst stuff imaginable. It was almost like a shift in the entire field. It's like when the guy broke the 4-minute mile record and then more people started to break the record. It was like when someone overcomes something in the field, it affects the entire collective. And her soul, it was out of love that she came into her body. So that's the perspective from the person who had the worst experience imaginable.
Yeah.
She's not describing a trap. So I don't know what to make of all of it.
No, and it's like that's a mastery as well, isn't it? And are we here to become masters in that? And they talk about ascended masters. I know it's all a bit new age kind of thing, but are they are they put on this realm to endure certain things, to learn, to come back, or to learn enough to help others? And that's part of. Is that something we're all doing? Are we all doing it in our own little way? I mean, I just don't know. Are there older souls? Are we all the same? We're a collective, aren't we? I know that much. Consciously, we are a collective. Like you've talked about. Remote viewing or telepathy. You've talked a lot about telepathy. That if someone's going to call you. We have that connection, don't we? You can think about someone, you've not thought of them for a while, and all of a sudden they're on the phone. And there's something. This is the whole point, though, isn't it? This is not just a material 3D world. There's so much more going on that we should explore and have an adventure with. It's exciting. This is me being Indiana fucking Jones. You know what I mean? This is my opportunity to explore and have an adventure. And I'm sure you feel the same, Mark, with writing the books that you've written.
Yeah. We have a choice as to how we interpret any experience. Right? Anything can happen in life, but it's the way that we perceive it and the way that we internalize it.
Yeah.
And we do know that there are good things in the world, and that love is something that people experience, and joy and ecstasy are things that are experienced in this world. So to me, there is this variation that's undeniable.
Yeah.
That we know the positive things exist because we experience them. We know the negative things exist too. So that's why, to me, the soul trap conversation is probably so much more nuanced than we can even understand.
Yeah.
We might not even be able to comprehend the way reality works in these various dimensions. So there could be hints of truth in all of it. And they all go together in some kind of mutually agreeable way that we can't comprehend. But regardless of that, we know at any moment we can choose how our consciousness is functioning.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that's for certain in this life, this experience we're having, and that's change. Isn't it? There's always going to be change somewhere, and one of those big changes is our materialist body, our physical body is going to eventually die. It's going to end. And I know you've done the ND exploration. Have you come to any conclusions of what happens? Are we an individual consciousness, or do we then just? You talked about the stream and the whirlpool. Do we go back into that, and you're just part of a whole?
It's a good question. The analogy you're referencing, it comes from Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who says that all of reality is like a stream of water, an infinite stream of water, and water is like consciousness. So each of us as a person is a whirlpool within the stream, meaning that we have a sense of being an individual, but we're interconnected as part of the collective. So the idea in this analogy is that when a whirlpool delocalizes, it stops being a whirlpool, the water doesn't leave the stream. It just transitions into a new form, and arguably it could reconfigure into a new whirlpool. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a multidimensional whirlpool. So what happens in the NDE, so that perspective is sort of like an individual consciousness transitioning from one to another. But I could also imagine that the water goes into the stream and it picks up some of the other water and it becomes some of the individual, but then part of something else, like kind of a merging of souls. So it might not be one-to-one. I mean, there could be, I've heard this notion of split incarnations where there could be an oversoul and then variations of the soul within different bodies. I mean, I don't know how it works, but we have some hints from the near-death experience state where a person is dying and then they only go so far because they are resuscitated.
Okay.
Some people will say, well, that's a near-death experience. They didn't actually die. You actually don't know what happens when people die. And that's a good argument because they didn't go that far. But there's something called a shared death experience. And there's peer-reviewed literature on this too, where a person who is not dying, meaning they have a fully healthy brain, they could be a family member, a bystander near the person who's dying, sometimes not even near the person who's dying. They co-live in the dying process with the person who's dying. And sometimes they feel that person's life review. So this is a person who is dying. It's being experienced by a person who's not dying. And that to me suggests that, and it's described just like a near-death experience. So to me, that might be a window suggesting that the near-death experience is a glimpse into the dying process because of the shared death experience by a person who's not dying.
Whoa. That's crazy.
The other thing I'll add, at the University of Virginia, I mentioned they have over 2,500 cases of young children who have a memory of a life that's not their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a past life implicitly. Although some people would say they might just be tapping into some other life that's not their own, but they're tapping into some other life, and they'll have personality traits, fears, things that they crave that don't make any sense based on when they were born. And the researchers are able sometimes to find historical records to validate what the children say. And sometimes the children have birthmarks or physical defects in their body that align with the way they died in this other life. So they might have birthmarks in places that align with bullet entry and exit wounds in the way the person died. Or there, in my book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, I show a picture from Dr. Ian Stevenson's book from UVA. It's called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. This little girl's leg is indented as if it were tied up with ropes in multiple places, but that's the natural shape of her leg. She described in her previous life dying, being tortured as another person, tied up in ropes and so forth. And there was a person that died in that manner. So there are these cases where the children are clearly tapping into some other life. But I mention this as a preface because in a number of these cases, the children also have intermission memories between lives. And they talk about seeing their parents, choosing their parents, for example. And to me, that's an individuated consciousness that they're describing.
Yeah.
So I don't know how all this works. Whether it's individuated to some degree in the reincarnation cycle, if there's a blending of souls, if some souls don't reincarnate and they go back into the broader stream, or they go back into the broader stream and they come back, I don't know.
You feel that the consciousness comes first, though, in your opinion? I mean, it's not like the chicken and the egg, what comes first here. We're talking consciousness is what's created material, really.
To me, that is the most parsimonious way to describe reality, because I don't think we can know with certainty. And the word parsimonious here refers to Dr. Bernardo Kastrup's argument, basically, which is that we could describe all of reality using consciousness as the basis of reality with the fewest assumptions. Because consciousness is something that we all know through direct experience, and we can explain reality as a manifestation of consciousness. If we're all part of some universal consciousness, experiencing it through different lenses, we can explain all of reality perfectly. Everything that we call physical, actually, that's just a manifestation of consciousness. I touch my table and I hear the sound. The touching is occurring in my consciousness. I just interpret it as out there. Yeah. There's noise that occurs in my consciousness. Everything is always occurring in our consciousness. The reason that's more parsimonious than another perspective is because anything outside consciousness that creates consciousness invokes a world that we could never verify. Now, let me explain what I mean there. The conventional view of reality, physicalism, scientific materialism, Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, a bunch of stuff flying around, Darwinian evolution, you end up with a human being and consciousness pops out after 13.8 billion years. That implies that there was a period before any consciousness existed, meaning it creates a whole category of reality. Bernardo Kastrup calls it an ontological category, a category of reality of a material world that's independent from and outside of all consciousness. There was a world outside consciousness, and then consciousness came later. The problem is, because consciousness is needed in order to verify that anything exists, we cannot verify that worldview. Because if there's a world outside of consciousness that's totally independent of it, it's never experienced with consciousness. Right? It's by definition never experienced. So this is his argument, that the most parsimonious, the best metaphysics, basically using the fewest assumptions, always has to start with consciousness, because anything else could never be verified.
That's sent my head west. That I can't even put that into any kind of logical. I'm like, where are we going here now? This is the fascinating subject of it all. I think it's just incredible. We don't really know a lot, do we? When it comes down to it,
the only thing I think we know is that at this moment, it feels like I'm having a conscious experience. I don't even know if you're conscious. I think you are, but it's probabilistic. I just believe it. I can't prove it. I think the past happened. I can't prove the past happened. I can look at a picture, but I'm looking at the picture in the present moment.
Yeah.
I can think about the past, but it's a memory in the present moment.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of inference in our lives.
It's weird, isn't it? Because like you were saying there, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one around. I could be walking around in my day and going, am I the only one having an experience here? This is purely my dream, you know, and sometimes it feels like that. And I think this is where we can, you know, we can master ourselves a little bit and have that awareness of ourselves, and we can create a better reality for ourselves. Then surely, I don't know, this is us being creators. You know, it's that excites me a little bit. You know, I've turned 50-year-old, but it's only now I'm going, I'm deprogramming myself. I'm, like you're saying, about stripping back those layers, those traumas and everything else that we've carried since from childhood onwards. And having this new spiritual adventure where we're getting a bit closer to who we truly are. I think it's incredible, Mark. I think this is these conversations. I always feel enlightened when I've had them. You know, I go off the call and I'll be like, that was great. That.
Well, yeah, it is exciting because there's a path toward something meaningful. Versus how I used to look at life. There's nothing meaningful because you're going to die and then it's lights out. That's the end of your consciousness. So who really cares? Versus this idea that there's some path we're on to try to improve in some way. And that reality is way more mystical and exciting and interesting than we might even realize. And that we don't have to be the old version of ourselves, that we can change and transform ourselves.
Absolutely. These are just stories. We're creating stories, and you can change the story whenever you want.
Yeah.
I had a breakdown, and I recognized that if I didn't change some of the story, then I was always going to repeat. I was going to, because it's the second breakdown I'd had in sort of 10 years. So I had to change the story. You know, it's no good keeping that continuing. You know, we can make changes in our lives to improve our experiences. But yeah, this is fascinating. So how did you end up going into cosmology then from there? What took you on that level?
Well, Cosmology is the most recent book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos. And interestingly, it was born out of the book before it, An End to Upside Down Medicine, because there were a lot of people who I respect who I agree with in their view of medicine and the way that they challenge many of the basically explanations about why people get sick. They look at many logical fallacies and conclusions in medicine. And they all said to me the same thing. Mark, if you get it with medicine, wait until you look at cosmology, because the physicists are making the same logical errors. And it's created a whole worldview that we actually have never verified and might be completely wrong. So that's the short version, is that I started to question everything. The Big Bang, what's Earth's place in the cosmos, Earth's motion, the foundations of physics. I wanted to go back to the basics and all that.
Oh, wow. You're going to open some lies now then, aren't you? So, I mean, obviously we're taught very much about the globe, aren't we? The spinning, you know, and I've never I'll be honest with you, it's not something I've really dived into. You know, I know a lot of people who are into the flat Earth theory. I'm more in a feeling that this is my reality. It can be any shape I decide it to be. But I mean, what I will say is I know we're lied to. That I know that for a fact we're lied to for whatever reason. So what's the biggest lie then, Mark?
To me, it's the entire cosmology. And I also, I don't know what this place is. I don't know where we live. But the model that's been proposed, I would argue, has not been established. We have no direct evidence for that model, and there are certain observations that seem to falsify it. So I'll give a few examples. The entire cosmology, which goes like this. Let me recite the cosmology, because most people aren't even aware of what we're told that we believe. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book. It's like, well, if you believe this mainstream cosmology, then you believe these other things too. Yeah. So 13.8 billion years ago, so some unimaginably long time ago, there was this event that started expanding our universe, and all this physical matter started expanding in the universe. And when the pieces of matter were interacting after long periods of time, you end up with what we have now, which is solar systems and galaxies and these gas giants and planets like Earth revolving around gas giants. And we're expanding out this ever this unimaginably fast rate, over 1 million miles an hour. And so it's continuing to expand. But this one solar system where Earth resides is where Earth is one planet out of many going around the sun, revolving around the sun. And in this case, Earth is in a state of free fall around the sun constantly because of the way the laws of gravitation work. We're in a constant state of free fall around the sun at over 66,000 miles per hour right now, while we're expanding outward over 1 million miles an hour. And we're also going around the Milky Way galaxy at over 500,000 miles an hour. And all this is happening while Earth is on a tilted axis. It's wobbling in multiple ways. And it's revolving on this axis at roughly 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, which is faster than the speed of sound. While closer to the poles on the sphere, it's moving much more slowly, because that's how it works when you rotate a ball. And Earth has an oblate spheroid shape, meaning it's not a perfect sphere, but it's spheroid, and it has a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles at the equator. That's the basic model of what we're told, that we're moving in all these ways, but we don't feel any of it. And there was a big bang. So let me just go through direct observation. I know this might be too strict for some people, but this is where my mind now goes. If we're told something is true, I want to see the direct evidence for it. So we've never seen a big bang. We've only seen things like radiation that is known as the cosmic microwave background, and there was a Nobel Prize awarded for it, that scientists say, well, that radiation came from a big bang 13.8 billion years ago. That's not the same as actually knowing there was a big bang. There's another problem with the big bang, one out of many, is that there needed to be rapid expansion at the beginning, known as inflation. And there's no known mechanism for how that could happen with modern physics. So physicists have said there could have been a particle called an inflaton that caused this rapid expansion. The problem is no one has ever found an inflaton particle. So the entire chain of events that I described to you about Earth and its place in the cosmos, you need an inflaton particle to explain the rapid inflation 13.8 billion years ago, which has never been found. So that's a big problem. So now let's go to more contemporary things like Earth revolving around the sun. There's no image of Earth in its place around the sun with all the other planets there. You know the picture we've all seen with Mars and Mercury and everything else, and Earth is one of them? There's no picture of that.
No.
That's an inference. There's never been direct evidence of Earth's motion in any way. There's no video of Earth flying around the sun in a state of free fall.
No.
And there's no video of Earth as an oblate spheroid on a tilted axis doing a full rotation on its axis.
Interesting.
Because that would be the spinning globe model. You'd want to see a full rotation of Earth, and you'd want to zoom in at the top of the sphere and see buildings and people standing upright, and then sideways on the side and upside down on the bottom, because that should all be happening simultaneously. And you want to see the oceans hanging on to the ball and not falling off.
That's
right. We
right.
don't have that. What do we have? We have a lot of composite images. We have a lot of CGI. We have a lot of pictures that are from high altitude that show ambiguous curvature, and then people extrapolate all sorts of things. So we have no direct evidence for the spinning globe model or the Big Bang or heliocentrism, meaning the sun's at the center and Earth revolves around the sun. That's an inference. Another big inference that props up the whole thing, and I start my book off with this: dark matter and dark energy. In order for mainstream physics to work, meaning mainstream cosmology, 96% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy. That means 4% is what's known as baryonic matter. That's the matter that we're familiar with. The rest is 96% dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter was discovered, quote unquote discovered, in 1933. There was an astronomer who was observing a cluster of galaxies, and things were basically moving too fast. Too fast, meaning Albert Einstein's relativity theory, which is Einstein's gravity, would have predicted you would need a lot more mass to be there in order for things to be moving that way. And the amount of missing mass was on the order of 99%. So the equations were way off in order to explain these observations. So to me, there were two options. Option one, we need to rethink gravity and all of Albert Einstein's theories, because clearly something's wrong here. Option two, which is what science went with. Well, Einstein was right, clearly. We just don't understand the matter that's there. So we're going to create dark matter and plug it in.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Think about the chain of events here. You need dark matter in order for Albert Einstein's relativity theory to work. And Albert Einstein's relativity theory was essentially a cover-up for Newton's gravity, because Newton's gravity had big problems. It's unable to explain Mercury's motion around the sun in the sky. It is not a comprehensive theory.
Right.
Okay, so these are not laws, but you see the chain of events here? It's like a house of cards. Well, if dark matter is not what we're told, okay, and does gravity work? Then we have to rethink motion. We have to rethink, well, the apple falls to the ground, but maybe it falls to the ground because of another reason we don't fully understand. Here's where it gets really tricky, is that now scientists have been studying dark matter since 1933 to try to understand, okay, this is a huge part of physics. And now some mainstream physicists are saying it's not even there. Pavel Krupa, who's an astrophysicist from the University of Bonn in Germany, he and his colleagues have spent over 2 decades on this. And he's saying now that with more than 5 sigma confidence, 99.999+% confidence, dark matter has been falsified. In other words, he's looking at the predictions that you would expect to be true if dark matter were there, and they don't work. So wait, dark matter doesn't exist? So what does that mean about gravity and relativity? And you kind of need gravity to exist in order for oceans to hang on to a sphere without falling off, and many other things.
Yeah.
Similarly, mainstream physics does not have a unified theory that can explain how the leading theories work. So the 2 leading theories are Einstein's relativity, which might be wrong, and quantum mechanics. Mainstream physicists will say that those 2 theories work very well on their own, that Einstein's gravity can explain the big things in reality, like galactic stuff, whereas the quantum world is much more of the smaller stuff. But when you combine the theories, the equations basically blow up. They don't work together. So we don't have a comprehensive theory that can explain everything. Michio Kaku, who's a mainstream physicist, I quote him in my book, he says, we have a mismatch here in science on the order of 10 to the 120th power, a 1 with 120 zeros after it. That's the mismatch we have. And I give this preface because I know when people first hear the idea of questioning cosmology, of like, wait, you're questioning whether Earth moves, you're questioning whether Earth is at the center, you're questioning whether Earth is this shape with a radius of specifically roughly 4,000 miles. Why would you do that, Mark? Because we can explain everything so well. The answer is actually we can't explain everything so well. There's no unified theory. And in order for everything to work in physics, you need to have 96% of the universe as dark matter and dark energy. So in effect, scientists are telling us without saying it, they're saying, grant me these miracles, and then we're going to explain everything else, without acknowledging that it's basically a house of cards with very shaky foundations.
This opens it up again, this lie of why they would do it, because that makes us be the small speck of dust that has no meaning.
Right. Exactly. It has us flying around in this infinite vacuum. We're one speck, we're one planet out of many in just one solar system. And there are many solar systems and galaxies and gas giants. And we're insignificant. It goes to me along well with the idea of we are in a random and meaningless universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are many spiritual people who believe in the spinning globe cosmology, who believe that we're just one out of many important parts of a bigger creation. But think about it. If Earth is, let's say Earth occupies a central place here, and everything we see in the sky is doing what it looks like, which is moving around us, that very quickly starts to invoke a higher intelligence of, wait, if we do occupy a central place, maybe there is some important reason for us being here. And if there is a deception, it would be important to want to keep people's consciousness deceived as to how significant we are. It makes a lot of sense. You would want to metaphysically deceive people of, oh, you're just one little speck, don't worry about it, you're insignificant, versus you're really significant. And who knows, maybe part of this creation was designed. I don't know. And could we be so disconnected from that design that was for us in some way that we then lose track of the purpose of our puzzle piece? Because if consciousness is that important, you'd want to deceive everyone in every way possible.
Yeah, it takes us right back to this demiurge type character, really, doesn't it? Of keeping us all as the battery And the Matrix goes into that in nice detail. It's quite a Gnostic story, I suppose, in a way. That we're just here as batteries until we wake up, have our awareness, realize who we truly are, and take control of ourselves, really, I suppose, become masters. There's a lot to be said about it. So that I'll have to dive into that a bit more. It's something I've not really... I've always felt I just know we're being lied to, but that clearly will say that, they're just making it out that we're this insignificant speck of dust that means nothing. And I think we know deep down that's just bullshit. We're much more important than that. We're not just here having an experience. There's a reason for it. What would the point be? Like you, when you were younger and you're thinking, well, I just go through my life and then I die. Well, that's crap, isn't it? No, I don't know if it's my ego that won't allow that, but I think it's actually deep down inside of me, it's going, no, you're much more important than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes away from the potential mysticism of the world too. If we are small and insignificant, there's something in the psychology there of then maybe you wouldn't have psychic abilities, or that your consciousness wouldn't survive. I think they do go together. And even there are things within Earth that I'm curious about, because there's an Antarctic Treaty of 1959 that restricts free and private access. Certainly people go to parts of Antarctica, but that doesn't tell us about all of Antarctica. It would be like someone saying, well, I visited Manhattan and therefore I know all about North America. There's a lot we haven't explored there. And who knows what exists within our world on land, but also below us, I'm very curious about. Because if Earth has a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles, then you should have to dig down about 4,000 miles to learn about the core, but no one's ever been to the core. We don't know if it's there. It's an inference. The farthest anyone has dug down is about under 8 miles, not 4,000 miles. We don't even know what's below us. That's the reality. So there's a lot of mystery here about where we live, that there could be reasons that we're being deceived about this that we don't even understand fully. Maybe there are resources that would eliminate poverty, or elements of, energy that could get rid of a lot of the problems we have in the world. So therefore we need to be deceived. Otherwise we would discover it and be free. There's just a host of possibilities here about why we'd want to be deceived. And to me, we don't always have to know the answer of what is true. To me, what's important is finding out what's not true.
Yeah, I agree.
They proposed a very specific model of reality, and we can go through and say, that hasn't been established, that's been falsified.
Yeah.
But we don't know what's true. And that leaves us in a place that's very uncomfortable of saying, I don't know where I live. I don't know exactly what I am.
That's right.
I don't even know exactly what the purpose of life is. But that might be the reality. We don't know all the answers.
And the treaty is a big one, because politically, let's be honest, we're always at war with each other. Countries are always at war, but yet they all agree with this treaty. They always stick with this treaty, don't they? You never hear of them going against that. Oh, China's decided to go to Antarctica and they've broken the treaty. You never hear any of that. So for whatever reason, they keep that agreement. And that is enough for me to have question marks on what's going on there. There's much more to explore, clearly.
And the US and the Soviet Union were both part of that treaty. Wasn't that during the Cold War era, when they shouldn't have been major enemies? Also a space treaty that the US and the Soviets were involved in together. Yeah. Very curious things. Why is there such limited access to these places? Why can't people freely just go there? Why should governments around the world control it? It's very curious. But then, people will fight that and say, but I just went to Antarctica and I saw the penguins there. Or there's the final experiment. Are you familiar with that event that happened?
No, I've not seen that.
So this was this past winter, where there were people who believe in flat Earth, a few of them, and then mostly people who believe in the globe model. They went to Antarctica during the Southern Hemisphere summer. And what they wanted to see was whether or not the sun remained in the sky for 24 hours, because in the globe model, that's what would happen. So they called this the final experiment. And they observed in the sky the sun for 24 hours. Okay. And many people now have been saying this is the end of flat Earth. This proves the globe.
Okay.
The problem with that logic is that, first of all, it's not an experiment. It's not the final experiment. It was a single observation in one location.
Right.
If Antarctica is what is claimed, it would be massive, and you'd want to know what's happening in many places. We don't know exactly where they were. But also, there's a logical fallacy here. It's called affirming the consequent, which happens all over the place. If X, then Y, Y, therefore X. If it rains, the grass outside will be wet. I observe that the grass outside is wet, therefore I conclude that it rained.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of other reasons the grass could be wet, like dew or sprinklers, or maybe some part of biology we don't even understand, or children running by and they poured water on the grass.
Yeah.
So the point here is that you could have a model of reality that explains an observation. That's the wrong model. So if the globe model were true, there would be a 24-hour sun in Antarctica. People observed a 24-hour sun in one location in Antarctica. Therefore, it's a spinning globe. You see the logical fallacy?
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying, well, rain explains wet grass, and I saw wet grass, therefore it rained, because rain would explain it. No. They found an observation compatible with the model. That's fine. But there are a lot of observations compatible with multiple models. I'll give another case. Heliocentrism versus geocentrism. This has been an ancient debate. Is Earth at the center, geocentrism, or is it the sun at the center? Yeah. Since Copernicus and Galileo, the conclusion has been the sun's at the center and Earth is just one thing going around the sun. But what I didn't realize until I started researching for this book, is that mainstream physicists like Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Fred Hoyle, they have all said that if you look at the lights in the sky, you cannot tell whether Earth is at the center or the sun's at the center.
Yeah.
It's called a kinematic equivalence. You actually cannot tell which is which. So you can observe things in the sky and say, either model is true, but doesn't mean they're both right. Or let's take Galileo's observations. He observed the phases of Venus when he looked through his telescope. And he concluded, or the world concluded, okay, we proved that the sun's at the center. The phases of Venus are sort of like the phases of the moon. And he said, well, this would work on a heliocentric model. The problem is you could come up with a geocentric model that works too, that explains the phases of Venus, which is if Venus goes around the sun while the sun goes around Earth, you'd see the phases of Venus also. So this observation can be explained by heliocentrism, but it can also be explained by geocentrism. And that's the problem with a lot of these models in cosmology and physics, is they'll see something and they'll observe it, and then they'll come up with a model that would explain it, and they'll say, because this model explains it, this must be the right model. Well, I see wet grass. Rain would cause that, therefore it rained. I have to repeat that because there's so much press right now about the final experiment. First of all, it's not a final experiment. It was a single observation in one location, and it didn't prove anything. It showed one observation, certainly an important one, that would be compatible with the globe, but it doesn't tell us why that observation was there. We need a lot of replications of it, and we need a lot of other observations to prove where we live.
Yeah, and it's so this world is so tricky anyway, and there's that many lies being spun, and that many, you don't know where they are when they're doing that kind of experiments anyway. You know, it's just, what do you believe? It's so hard to believe anything these days anyway. What you see on social media or certainly not the news. I don't watch the news, but you know, we're throwing all sorts of nonsense, aren't we?
Yeah.
And they lie to us. They lie to us. I mean, Elon Musk is constantly going on about going to Mars, isn't he? And SpaceX and all that kind of stuff. But every time I see footage of it, it just looks like a load of nonsense to me. You know, it looks like, I mean, have we ever even been into space? I mean, I even doubt that, you know. We might have satellites orbiting around, but I don't see that we've been anywhere.
Right. We know that things are up there in high altitude. The question is space the way we're told it is, which is that it's this vast, nearly infinite vacuum that exists outside our atmosphere. The problem is we get into another issue with physics, because that model says there is a near infinite vacuum, basically a highly low pressure system sitting next to Earth peacefully, but Earth is not closed because the atmosphere is sitting there.
Yeah.
The problem is, like, if you open up a can of soda, you hear a loud noise sometimes. It's because there's a lot of pressure on the inside. And then when you open it up, there's an equalization. It reaches this homeostasis where the high pressure of the inside goes out into the lower pressure of the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Now here we have a near infinite vacuum of space, highly low pressure next to Earth. Our atmosphere should be going out into the vacuum.
Yeah.
Physically does not make sense.
No.
What do scientists say? They say the force of gravity is sufficient to hold in that pressure gradient. Even though it is a near infinite vacuum, somehow gravity holds it in. That's what they say.
It's hard to believe, really. When you look at it and you critically look at it, it's hard to believe. And you're just shown these pictures as kids, and you're given Star Wars to work on as a child, and you've got this like you say, this vast infinite space to explore, and you sold this astronaut, this exploration of space. You sold it. I mean, do they really know if you sent a human up there that they would survive? Even if you could get through the Van Allen belt alone,
right? And it's interesting they haven't been back since the.
Well, they lose the
60s, early
blueprints,
70s. Right?
Yeah.
It's very curious that the Van Allen radiation was going to be such a big challenge, but then they transcended that challenge. But now they haven't been able to go back. Yeah. It's very strange. And to me, to think that, let's say last year NASA had a $25 billion budget. That the idea that you could send human beings to the moon safely and back and send probes out into deep space and have these billions and billions of dollars, and you can't provide video footage of a spinning globe. Doesn't make sense. You could put all this to bed very quickly by showing direct evidence. Instead, if you look it up, it's hard to believe the amount of indirect evidence you have in composite images and things you see where it's part of Earth, or a disk, not a sphere. A circle is not a sphere.
No.
We want to see a full sphere. That would be a great thing to see. We don't have that.
I think they're in danger a little bit, Mark, as well. I mean, even the my mother's generation are starting to look at the fact that they apparently had a craft that you could probably put together from pieces of a cereal box that apparently has been on the moon. It's like people are starting to look at it and go, well, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. What else have they lied about?
But you don't even have to look that far. So the blue marble picture of Earth, which is on the iPhones, anyone can look this up. The NASA artist photoshopped. He said it was photoshopped because it had to be. He talks about how he created the image based on what he thought it should have looked like from space.
It's just like, but it's fed it. We're constantly fed it.
Yeah.
From childhood, the globe is on the desk of the teacher. It was, in cinemas, it'd be the first thing you'd see is a spinning globe. It'd be on television. It's constant. But these are questions that started to come for a lot of people from 2020. When, let's dive into it for a little bit. For the pandemic, there was clearly, from a lot of people could see the lies. Thankfully, not everyone, unfortunately, and a lot of people have suffered because of it. But we are being moved now into a technocratic transhumanism agenda, which I think it was always about: digital ID, surveillance, and that's what it seems to be all about. And you've written about this as well, haven't you? So the Great Reset.
Yeah. To me, this stuff all flows together. That's the interesting thing. You might think politics and sociology, cosmology, consciousness, they're separate. They're all together. To me, the Great Reset, which, by the way, is not a conspiracy theory. This was an initiative announced in 2020 by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, and then Prince Charles and John Kerry. Very prominent people said, now it's time for a Great Reset. COVID's going to usher it in. And the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, written by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malloret, describes basically their vision for society. And the way I look at it, the reason I wrote my book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, was to show how all these initiatives, which they look on the surface, this is so compassionate. We want to make the world a better place. It's actually about consolidating power and controlling people rather than allowing for prosperity. And there's nothing about spirituality there. There's no consciousness reset or helping empower people to understand the soul or anything that we're talking about in terms of the esoteric. That's not part of the Great Reset. So to me, the Great Reset is a blueprint around this mechanism of control within the spiritual war. It's explaining how the spiritual war is manifesting in the modern times. And today it's called the Great Reset. In the past, it's probably been called different things. In the future, it'll be called something else. But it's really about taking away human freedom and disempowering the individual.
And again, why? What is it we must be important? That's all I can keep coming back to. There must be something about us for them to continually keep us as downbeat, as negative as possible. What is it? There's no freedom in what they're trying to achieve for us. And how do we get out of this, Mark? And I know awareness is key to this. What is it we're supposed to do in this situation? As they bring in Palantir as an example, the Chinese model, the social crediting system, the universal basic income, all of these. I've had a great time in the 90s, but my children haven't experienced what I experienced in the 90s. Might have been the last decade of having a bit of freedom, before these things really appeared. So where are we heading?
I think it all starts with a shift in each individual's consciousness to shift toward whatever the truth is and away from the falsehoods. Because if we do exist within spiritual dimensions, there are forces involved that are working with us or against us. Or you could argue the ones working against us are also testing us. But in any event, maybe there are forces that are making us have a smoother path versus one that's going to be much more filled with suffering. So what I find is that as we attune our consciousness and really have a pure intention of, I want to be aligned with the truth. I want to be a pure vessel of this benevolent consciousness so that I can be of service. And then I want to do everything I can to work on myself, to purify myself, the waking up, the cleaning up, the growing up, showing up, doing all that work. Then who knows what we do? Because then I think we become the puzzle piece that's designed to do something very specific. So the more each of us wakes up to that and becomes the authentic puzzle piece, then I think we create some kind of a new and better world. And it might be that not everyone does it. Maybe there's a new kind of society that splits off, or maybe the whole system crumbles. I don't know how it's going to manifest, but all we can do is the internal work and orienting our own intentions and handling life to the best of our ability. Beyond that, we can't control it.
Yeah, sure. Have you ever looked at sort of the resets that people talk about, like the mud flood theories and even Atlantis and various other things? Have you ever looked into things like that?
Yeah. Past civilizations that were advanced. The idea of the mud floods I've heard is that there was advanced civilization here as recently as like the 1700s or 1800s, and that our memory was wiped out. And then there were World's Fairs or something that repopulated and re-educated. I haven't looked into it deeply enough to have a strong opinion. I mean, at this point, I have no clue about anything. I do think some of the really advanced architecture that was allegedly built during a time of horse and buggy, that's very strange. If you look at certain cathedrals or state capitol buildings or going into Washington, D.C., a lot of the architecture there, that maybe architecture was a form of technology. That's the idea, that it could have been harnessing ether or something for free energy. So I think I'm open to all that. I don't know. And it's very difficult to verify. It's also difficult because of beliefs in geology, the way that we do carbon dating. And is that really reliable to know when something existed or to know about something in the past? And it's all inference. We're inferring something. We weren't there to know what happened. So we end up with these theories like, well, the dinosaurs were wiped out with an asteroid, for example. But think about how many inferences that's based on. First of all, you need to have a 13.8 billion year time frame in order for Earth to be its age, in order to have dinosaurs in the Darwinian evolutionary path for where humans are. But if the Big Bang's wrong, then who knows if that's even possible. But this notion of an asteroid, do we know for sure that an asteroid has ever hit Earth? we see shapes that we call craters because we know, again, this is affirming the consequent logical fallacy. If an asteroid hit, it would create a cratered shape dent in Earth. I observe a crater-shaped dent on Earth, therefore there was an asteroid. We've never found the remains of this massive asteroid that should have been in these craters. Think about what would have caused that, the amount of mass there. What, it just all vaporized? That's very convenient. The other thing that's super interesting is notice that the craters always come as if the asteroid came straight down.
Yeah.
If you lived on a globe, you'd have asteroids coming from all different directions. So you should have skid marks. You never have that. So, and I talk about this in my book, and Into the Upside Down Cosmos. Some geologists are like, wait, these shapes sometimes, they might be like what geysers, they might be geological formations, not asteroids. So the reason I give you that long statement about asteroids and dinosaurs is that there's so much about our history that we are making based on inference, which makes us open-minded. We really don't know what this place is or what happened here before us.
It's wild, isn't it? It's wild. And you know what, Mark? It's so important that you're doing this work and you're putting these books out. And I hope, if anything, I hope people will just question things, you know, they'll read it, they'll question, listen to your podcasts, and just question this reality. This isn't just a material world. There is much more going on. And we might never get to the bottom of it all, but let's enjoy it while we're here a little bit. Is there any final words you want to put out there? And how can people find you, buy your books?
Well, my website is a good place to start. It's markgober.com, markgober.com. 7 books out. They're all on Amazon in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats. I narrated all the audibles myself. And my podcast series, Where Is My Mind? It's just 8 episodes, and it goes in chronological order. So start with episode 1 up to 8. And it's about the nature of consciousness, near-death experiences, and psychic abilities. My final thought here would be to encourage your audience what I try to tell myself a lot, which is that if a claim is put forth to me, whether it's in my own mind or some claim about the world that an expert tells me, my question is, how is it that that claim was developed? And how is that claim known to be true? So if someone really believes strongly in the spinning globe model, can they demonstrate that to me? Or we haven't even talked about medicine. If someone believes that there is an intracellular parasite that gets inside of a host cell and replicates and bursts out and does this in other cells, and in the process causes physical disease symptoms in the person, and then jumps from one person or organism into another one and does the same thing and causes symptoms. I just described to you the definition of a virus. Please show that to me. What I just described to you, no one has ever seen that process. They've seen static images of a thing that they say is a virus, but it comes from an unpurified sample. That's a tangent. But it's the same issue of, if you're going to tell me something is true and then develop policies on the basis of that thing being true, I would like to have evidence that it is true. And I would like to have evidence that is not, well, I saw wet grass and I know rain causes wet grass, therefore it rained. We need to be aware of the logical fallacies in knowledge.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. And thanks for ending it like that, because we've got to keep questioning everything all the time. And keep doing the work you're doing, Mark. It's been an honor to chat to you on this evening. I've really enjoyed myself. Just the whole cosmology thing is something I need to explore.
Definitely.
I'm like, you know what? We've got to keep exposing these lies.
It's crazy, but the deeper you go, there's just so many unexamined assumptions. So I would encourage it. If you ever have any questions, just shoot me a note. Happy to share resources.
I will do. Thanks again, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work that you do as well.
No problem. Thank you.